Hello friends, and welcome to the Gesundheit Kitchen. My name is Hans Rufert, and I am a restaurant boy. I literally grew up living upstairs above our family's restaurant, and so my entire life has been kind of centered around eating out, even when eating out meant eating in my own home. But point being that when I was diagnosed with stomach cancer, one of my first thoughts was, what am I going to do when we go out to eat? And it can be a challenge, but I want to kind of talk today about some kind of tips and tricks and strategies on how you can still enjoy dining out when you don't have a stomach. So one of the first things you kind of have to mitigate is the enthusiasm. You sit down, you're ready to eat, you think, man, I am hungry. And so kind of naturally you're drawn to the entree section of the menu. Well, in reality, that's probably more food than you can eat. And we'll get to that in just a moment. But what I would suggest is rather than thinking about what am I going to eat main course, try to break it down. Are there appetizers that would kind of check that box for you? Things that sound good in that sort of smaller plate. Sometimes they're called tapas or small bites or appetizers, because quite honestly, one or two appetizers, especially if you have people that you can share those with, that will probably be all the calories that you can handle and all that you can need in one sitting. So start off by looking at those small bites, small plates, appetizer section. Anytime you have the opportunity to speak with the kitchen, do it. And as a former chef, I will tell you, sometimes the kitchen loves to just have an opportunity to take a break and walk out into the dining room. So don't feel like you're imposing when you ask, hey, does somebody in the kitchen, does the chef have a moment to come out and talk to me? I have some dietary restrictions. And again, we always kind of feel bad like we're imposing or we're being a problem, but the reality is you are probably giving that kind of tired person in the kitchen a break. And you know, if in a restaurant where they're doing the same items again and again and again, it's refreshing sometimes to have a special request. It means they're not doing the same thing over and over again. They get to kind of jump off of that train track and be creative again. So don't hesitate, don't be afraid or embarrassed to ask if you can speak to somebody from the kitchen. Now, of course, there are times where, again, as a chef, I don't have time to come out of the kitchen. So at least communicate with your server, the person that's taking care of you. Let them know, hey, I have some dietary concerns. If you don't feel like you want to go through the whole spiel of, I had stomach cancer and I lost my stomach, just tell them you're diabetic. And again, that's not exactly true, but the reality is your body can handle diabetic-friendly foods better than it can most any other type of food. So most restaurants are equipped to deal with diabetics or people with gluten allergies or soy allergies, so they should have some sort of a game plan for those more common allergies or medical conditions. So if you're in a big group and you don't want to go through the whole story again, just kind of pretend that you're diabetic, and anything that's diabetic friendly would probably work just as well for you. One trick that I often use is to ask for half of the meal packaged when I order it. So in other words, this actually was a trend in the 90s, and it was sort of a weight loss trend, where people would say, you know what, I want this meal, the chicken parmesan, but can you please go ahead and cut it in half, put half in a to-go box, and just serve me half. That way, I'm not trying to negotiate, I'm not asking, can I order a child's portion? It's just easier to say, give me the whole thing, cut it in half, box half of it up, and that way you're kind of getting 2 or even 3 meals out of one. So I'll be able to dine with the group, be a part of the experience. But when you're in a social setting and you have that whole plate of pasta or whatever it is, sometimes you find yourself, you're just eating out of habit. So if you ask your server or the kitchen, would you mind boxing up half of the meal and bringing me that, when it's time to leave? You'll find that it's harder for you to overeat in a social setting because you've already you've set those boundaries. Part of the joy of going out to eat is the fact that it's typically a social setting, right? And it's not just about what's on your plate, it's about who's across the table, it's about the stories that you share. So while you're sharing that experience, consider sharing the food. And if it's somebody you know, they know what your GI issues are. At least they have a rough idea that you can't eat that much. So see if you can get people to share appetizers, share a meal, share a bite of your dessert, or you share a bite of their dessert. If you can create that environment where, it's not that traditional way of, I'm ordering a main course, I'm ordering an appetizer. If you can order for the table, that way you can kind of graze throughout the meal and you can be in the driver's seat as far as what you get to eat, and it allows you to try different things. So don't be afraid to ask somebody on the table if they wouldn't mind sharing the thing you're excited about with you, so that they can be a part of that experience and you aren't overeating. Typically, most restaurants have a vegetarian option, or maybe even a subsection of the menu that's vegetarian, and those items are not always, but they tend to be a little healthier, a little lighter in fats and sugars and oils. So if if you're overwhelmed by all of these choices, that might be a great place to start. Look at the vegetarian options and see if there's something that is of interest to you. And if you've seen my videos before, I tend to lean towards the vegetarian protein options, but they're, again, not always, but if you're overwhelmed, that might be a good place to start on the menu, is look at those vegetarian or vegan options. So we're trying to avoid excess fat, we're trying to avoid excess sugars, and those two things often pop up in sauces and in salad dressings. So simple hack is just ask for your dressing or your sauce on the side. You still got the meal or the appetizer or the salad, but by having the sauce separate, you can now take your fork and just dip the tines of your fork into the dressing or the sauce prior to getting a bite, and you're then controlling how much is on there. Too often, restaurants tend to oversauce or overdress things, and again, that can be kind of a almost hidden source of those excess kind of empty calories that can trigger latent dumping syndrome or just kind of hypoglycemic issues. So just simply ask for those items on the side. Particularly right after surgery, whether you've had a partial gastrectomy or a total gastrectomy, eating and drinking together are a challenge. You only have a limited amount of real estate in your GI system. And if you drink too much liquid, there's not a lot of room left for food and vice versa. So just be careful that you aren't just mindlessly out of boredom or a social habit that you're drinking too much liquid, because when the food arrives, you're going to have a hard time getting excess food or even a proper amount of food into your system. So when talking about drinking, again, in a social setting, especially if it's something celebratory, it's very easy to have multiple rounds of alcoholic beverages being served. And nothing wrong with that, just know your limit. So I used to be a bit of a heavyweight, and now I'm an absolute lightweight. One drink and I'm kind of done. It goes straight into my system, goes straight to my brain. So just be careful that you're not overindulging, because what your old sort of threshold is, or was, is now completely different because you have a much smaller system. The other thing I would caution is about sodas and sugary drinks. Now, I'm from the South, I love a good glass of sweet tea, but I typically now in my breast pocket will have my packets of stevia, and I'll order an unsweetened tea, and then I'll add the sweetener that I can tolerate to my drink. Control that whenever you can, and I think that's kind of a good lesson in general. You try to control your intake. And in those kind of restaurant settings, sometimes it feels a little awkward or uncomfortable to do that. But particularly with beverages, just know your limits and try to stay within those. So it has almost become like a cultural norm that you're not done eating until that slice of cake or that scoop of ice cream, basically dessert is the thing that sort of signifies the end of a meal. And I love a good dessert, but quite honestly, I just can't handle that amount of sugar, that many calories. Oftentimes, I'm really good about controlling my portions and controlling how much I drink, and then when it's dessert time, it is so hard to limit yourself because you feel like you're denying yourself something. So I kind of feel like with any dessert, for any human, the best bite is the first bite. It's the law of diminishing returns, where, in a cheesecake, you eat that first bite and you're like, oh my God, this is delicious. And the second bite is, oh, that's pretty good. And by the sixth bite, you're like, oh my God, I'm only halfway through this thing, and you start to feel miserable. And again, that goes for everybody. So what I like to do now is when it comes dessert time, I'll let somebody else order a dessert, and I'll ask, hey, can I have one bite? Can I please have one bite of your cheesecake or one scoop of your creme brulee? And then what I try to do is I'll have that one spoonful of dessert, and then I'll put my spoon or fork away from me, and I'm done. And reality is that one bite, that first bite, was the best bite of the entire thing. So don't look at what you're not able to enjoy. Try to focus on what you are able to enjoy. And just that one bite of dessert will be enough to kind of signify and signal to your brain that, you know what, the meal is done, and you can push back knowing that you stayed within your limits. Hopefully there's some tips in there for you that'll make dining out a little less frustrating, a little less intimidating, because it can be. But this right here, it's the perfect size meal for me. It's warm, it's delicious, and it makes me feel like I'm still a part of the group. I still feel like I can go out to eat without being nervous about trying to overthink every option that I make. Take care of yourselves. I look forward to seeing you guys next time in the Gesundheit Kitchen, whether it's in the kitchen or in the dining room. Be well.